Welcome to Ippodhu's live show. We are now joined by Jade Lotus, sex coach from London. When you hear the word sex coach, you may think that here is somebody who will talk about just masturbation, premature ejaculation. No, here is a different kind of sex coach from London, and she talks about the need for having your heart, having the connection to have a great sex. Here is probably she comes with a lot of Asian sensibilities. That is why she is in the studio today to talk about what it means to be a sex coach with a difference, complete difference. As she talks to us now, we will understand how she is approaching the topic differently. And that does not mean she doesn't talk about repression in cultures like India or repression in cultures like West Asia. She does talk about that. She does talk about opening up. She does talk about sexual energy, finding the sexual energy, finding the secret of sex, all that she's talking about. Welcome to the show, Jade.
Thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me. I feel really blessed to be here.
Okay, I would like to start with the question, why sexual health is mental health? From your own personal story, from your own personal history, personal experience, talk about that.
Okay, so I'm here in England, by the way, and in England, in Europe, in the United States, in the Western world, we have very much the same problem of sexual repression that you get in Asia and in other parts of the world. In fact, this is almost like a pandemic, sexual repression, and I would say a kind of a sexual sickness as well. So people talk about there's the problem of sexual abuse, there's problem of premature ejaculation and so on. A lot of these problems are like really spreading into marriages, spreading into relationships, affecting families and so on. And so I suppose I could say I grew up in the UK. My family are what I would call hardcore Christians, so very sex negative, and they just didn't want to talk about anything. So even when I asked my mum how our baby's born, she told me they were dropped down the chimney by a stork. So when I got old enough that I started having a boyfriend, I was very, very confused about like what sex was supposed to be, what relationships were about. I didn't really understand the role of love in relationships either. I just entered like into sexual relationships in a really chaotic way that just ended up being really traumatic for me. And I think this is like a very, very common story. There's terrible sex education. We might be taught, okay, you can catch a disease, you can get pregnant. I mean, in my day, we weren't even told about consent. We certainly weren't told we as women have the right to say to a man, look, I'm okay with kissing, but I don't want you to penetrate me. Or, there was no idea, there was no education whatsoever about my own pleasure. So I stumbled through my sort of teenage years, going from this to that, just having like a bit of a traumatic time, basically. But at the time, I didn't even realize that it was traumatic, And when I probably settled down to my first meaningful relationship when I was around 21 years old, I remember my boyfriend saying to me, why don't you have an orgasm? And I thought only men had orgasms. I didn't realize women were supposed to have orgasms. I didn't realize what was going on with my body. I mean, I vaguely was aware I had a clitoris, but even touching my clitoris didn't feel good at all. Inside my vagina, I wasn't really feeling an awful lot. And suddenly, oh my God, I'm supposed to be having an orgasm? What's that? Yeah. And in those days, I'm 43 now. So in those days, you couldn't just go on Google the way that you can go on Google now. You could find out the information, not that I'm saying pornography is necessarily a good educator, but it was, magazines with a photo of someone. It wasn't educational stuff at all, So I was quite confused, but I had this strong sense that something is absolutely missing from me, and I talked to my doctor. My doctor was like, that's just how it is. That's just how you are, you know. And I guess the whole idea that it was very kind of dismissive of my experience, of my pleasure. And what I didn't realize was also going on with me at that time, and I didn't connect them at all, was I was having a lot of anxiety. I wasn't sleeping well at all. In fact, I was relying on cannabis to get to sleep, and then not even having a good quality sleep anyways. I was having a lot of back pain, just other kinds of problems, you know. And I didn't see, like, I would get colds all the time. I had a really low immune system, and I didn't see the connection. But somehow there was this feeling inside me that, my God, like, if I'm not having orgasm, I'm missing out on something of the female experience. And I was literally like, I don't want to die never having had an orgasm. And it was literally like by chance, I was in an esoteric bookshop, and this book just seemed to sort of like shine out at me, grabbed my attention. I went over, picked the book up, and the book was called Cultivating Sexual Energy, Female Sexual Energy by Mantak Chia. And I opened the book, I started looking through it. It's giving these what are Taoist exercises. So basically based from the Chinese tradition of Taoism. So exercises about how a woman can basically cultivate and activate her sexual energy. And when I saw it, I was like, my God, I know this is what I need to do. But even when I read the things in the book, they were so complex, you know, I didn't quite understand. But what I also realized is to do these sexual meditations, I also needed to do meditations where I was activating the energy in my body, where I was working on balancing my emotions, coming into a real relationship with my emotions. So not repressing my emotions, but owning them all, the good, the bad, everything, you know, and just actually coming to be comfortable with emotions that maybe in the past I thought like, oh, I just want to pretend this doesn't exist and so on, you know. So I started going to a few workshops, and I started learning, first of all, the meditations, how to meditate with my emotions, how to balance my emotions, how to start activating my my energy. And then I saw an advertisement for a workshop. It was a workshop, something called a jade egg. Yes. So I don't know if you've heard of yoni eggs, jade eggs. They're these eggs about this big that women put in their vaginas. It's a little mysterious, the whole process of it, you know. And I knew about them, but again, I hadn't learned anything what to do with it. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go on this workshop. So I went on this 3-day workshop. And the first few days, we were kind of, again, working on our emotions, working on our energy. So there was a big emphasis on having this relationship with our emotions. And then on the last day, we did this ceremony where we're all lying in this room as women with blankets over us, and we had our eggs. And she's first of all telling us, put the egg on our heart, send the love into the egg. So we really want the egg full of love, you know. And then she's getting this to move the egg down the body. The intention being it's moving towards our yoni. And as it gets to our yoni, she then says, now just stop and ask your yoni, what does your yoni want? Now, I'd never in my life heard of such a concept as asking my yoni something. What does my yoni want? You know, I'd always thought it was my boyfriend pushed his thing in backwards and forwards, you know. This is what everybody's doing, you know. And then the guy comes, and they even call it the man ejaculates. That's finishing. So the whole sex for however long in Europe, probably thousands of years, maybe less in India, because I know matriarchy was more recent in India. There's this whole idea that the sex is the man pushes it in, you know. And certainly in my culture, when I was growing up, if you kissed a man and then said no sex, he virtually had the legal right to rape you because you'd already kind of wound him up and so on, you know. So it was just such a shock that I could actually ask, you know, my yoni, and my yoni just said, just wait a bit, just hang on a bit, you know, just take your time. There's no rush, you know. And obviously we've all kind of rushed into sex, we've rushed into pleasure. There's a lot of sexual frustration just basically because we don't know what to do with our sexual energy. And I think I maybe played for 5-10 minutes around my yoni with the egg until I finally decided and made the conscious decision, and my yoni made the decision to bring the egg inside, you know. So she's taught us how to do this. She's taught us meditations where we're also even coming into contact with emotions that we've stored in our yonis, in our sexual organs. Men can also store in their lingams. And then I've gone off with this egg, and I've gone off with these meditations, and I've started doing them,
Okay.
And for the first few weeks, it was just incredible, because I felt just clouds of just energies that didn't belong to me just coming out of my body, And it wasn't that it was like I went through a horrific time. It was just, wow. Oh my God, yeah. And then suddenly there was a huge change in my body, and my yoni just started tingling with pleasure, And then suddenly my body started vibrating, and I started having orgasms. Now, at the same time, this back pain just disappeared. The sleep started happening properly. The anxiety just went down to very, very controllable levels. And suddenly it was like it was just clear ahead of me in my life, where I was going. And it was just, it dawned on me probably over a few weeks, like, my God, like, look at my life then. I had no idea that my sexual energy was so important, not just to my feeling of pleasure. And of course, pleasure is great because pleasure means that the energy is moving, but to my whole mental well-being, to my physical well-being, everything about me. And really just absolutely, I suppose, as well, what is so sacred about our sexuality, it's not just a thing that we rub, the harder you rub it, the harder you jerk it, the better you feel, or whatever, this whole sort of like 1 + 1 = 2 that we're being fed, for example, by the porn industry is such, it's such a deception, actually, because what it's doing is it's taking people down a path where they're losing, their sexual functioning, they're losing their pleasure, they're losing their focus, they're losing, it's affecting people's mental health as well, basically, So, then I started learning a bit more about Tantra. And of course, Tantra and Taoism, they both say the same thing, which is our sexual energy is a very powerful, but also a neutral force. It's not a good energy. It's not a bad energy. It's just neutral. And it comes from the root chakra, or the perineum. So basically where the prostate is on the man, between the anus and the sexual organs. And this energy, what this energy wants to do is like a spring coming out of the mountain, going into the village, feeding the villagers with water. And it wants to rise up our body and come up into our hearts. And in our hearts, what it does is it activates our ability to love ourselves and love other people. And when we're living, like, for example, if you look at people living in tribes and they're running around naked, there's no self-consciousness about their bodies, there's no sexual assault, and their energy, their sexual energy is just flowing up into their heart, and they feel a lot of love, and it's not being blocked. Whereas we, in England, with our Judeo-Christian morality, Victorian morality, obviously when the British were in India, there was a big, the Victorians didn't like the matriarchy, they didn't like Kali, they didn't like, the goddesses, basically, they didn't like to see women, in positions of power. So they very much indoctrinated the Indians at that time as well with the Victorian sexual morality, which I believe has led to a lot of mental health problems that are happening in India today, And so I guess what I realized was just how sacred, my sexuality is, how much a center of my being it is. So when we have this energy and when it's flowing, we can transform it into anything, into our creativity, into love. We can use it to heal our bodies in incredible, incredible ways. And this is a gift that's just gifted to us by the divine, gifted to us by Shakti, gifted to us by nature. And, most of the cultures in the world are going, ooh, that's dirty, repress it, feel guilty about it,
Yeah,
and look at
that's I'm coming to the another aspect of it, like the state, the cultures repressing it, and on the other side we have medical science. You also speak a lot about it. How in the 1990s some Australian scientist is finding more about the clitoris. Until then, the field of medical science does not have a proper map of the clitoris. Now, this is when this particular thing was talked about. Until then, all the surgeries, all the procedures done on women's genitals could be wrong. That awakening was coming in the late 90s when this Australian scientist is finding out about the real shape of the clitoris. There is also a huge knowledge gap in our entire knowledge ecosystem about female sexuality, female sexual energy. So it is not just about Victorian morality. It comes until 20th century. Until now, we have the legacy of the knowledge gap until now. So now you are one of the very few people who want to talk about it. Now, one of the few sex coaches who want to challenge the status quo and talk about female sexual energy. And how are you finding this journey? How do you deal with the kind of situations and challenges as you talk as you articulate these ideas? How is the reception you are finding from the communities?
I mean, I love talking about it and I'm very passionate about it. And I think that when someone hears you talking passionately about something, and I mean, some of my clients, they are Western medical scientists, they are Western medical doctors. And of course, when you use the term medical science, we are generally referring to Western science, but let's not forget, India has a whole medical science of Ayurveda. In China, you have the Chinese medicine, the Asian medicine. South America has its own sciences. Obviously, these were very much attacked by the colonizers. The same Africa has its own science, its own understanding of sexuality, its own sort of African Tantra, South American Tantra, and so on. So I do like to just make sure when we talk about medical science, we're talking about Western science. And when we look at Western science, we're looking at a science that essentially evolved out of the witch trials in Europe. So that was at a time in Europe, almost 1,000 years ago, when the Catholic Church started to take over Europe and they wanted to ban anything that didn't go along with their doctrine. So, for example, women who knew how to help other women to give birth, many of them were put to death. I've heard estimates 9 million women were murdered for their knowledge about herbs, their traditional knowledge. And during this time, it was part of this takeover of science, So male doctors then saying to women, okay, I'm going to tell you how to give birth, and putting women into the most awkward position possible, leading to uncountable deaths of women, uncountable deaths of children, and so on as well, And at the same time, this huge repression of sexuality, which many people will argue that it was actually to do with wanting to control people, because when you control someone's sexuality, you also control their consciousness to an extent, So female sexuality was so demonized. I'm certain that many of the witches put to death were women who were put to death for enjoying orgasms, for example. There was a real war against women and a war against female sexuality that went on in Europe for hundreds of years. Now, I think that they talk about at some point in the 20th century discovering the clitoris, as if it's off on Mars or it's a planet, off in the distance, and I'm blessed to have like really amazing teachers, to know like incredible people as well doing similar work to me. I would say like I keep myself, my friends do tend to consist of people that are more or less open to it. Although if my friends think I'm talking nonsense, I'm quite happy for them to say so. I don't mind being contradicted, but I think that something deep within people is saying, whatever we're being told about sexuality, I'm masturbating 5 times a day. I'm bored. I'm married to someone I love, but I'm bored, So people are just, they know that something's missing. So I suppose when you start talking about it and explaining it to them in a way that's empowering to them, and what I say to people is I say, look, become aware of your body, bring your attention into your body, feel your body, and start to ask your body, because your body knows. All the answers are inside of our body, in the chakra system. The bottom chakra is the root chakra. We have our sexual energy at the bottom. At the top, we have the third eye, the crown chakra. The energy, the sexual energy rises up and transforms. This happens inside people, it's something that we experience, that we're very capable of experiencing. Love, in my culture, certainly, we make a red heart to symbolize love. We don't draw a liver. We don't go, I liver you. We go, I heart you, because we know that we feel the love here in our hearts. So even when I start explaining actually to my most scientific clients, and I start explaining, and I think, okay, I'm going to have to do quite a job here explaining this to you. It's actually those people that I find the most open, people like endocrinologists, doctors working in A&E, they're working with their patients. They really want the best for their patients, but then they're just seeing that there's something that's missing out of the whole equation of Western science, and I think more and more people are understanding that there's something about, now that we're talking about sexuality, now that it's on the agenda, now that it's not so quite so, we're not so shut up about it, basically, people are starting to talk about this stuff, and they're starting to realize there must be something else. Because when we understand about the sacredness of our sexuality, it wakes up the magic in life, and we're no longer living in this kind of mundane world where we're just going through these routines, but we're actually in a world which is alive and it's awake and it's magical.
Yeah. Talking about, as you said, this whole idea of, when we talk about science, we talk only about Western science. It's also about the dominant narratives in history, dominant narratives in sexology. It's also about that. When you start talking about tantric ideas of sex, do you find a kind of disconnect with the American audience, or do you find some kind of synergy with the Asian audience? Do you feel there are two different worldviews here? That is my question.
I mean, so the dominant narrative of the world, obviously, it is the so-called Western colonizers who had their religion, Christianity, which is by far, to my awareness, the most sex negative, of all the religions that ever existed. So, for example, if you look at the dominator of the world, which is the United States, and I think something like 50% of Americans believe the earth is 5,000 years old, because this is what it says in the Bible. There's a big lack of kind of sex education. Coming along with this big lack of sex education, you have huge problems of date rape, even boys actually, or young men actually, making posters and promoting date rape as like a legitimate thing to do. Then you've got this enormous pornography industry, which it's one of the most viewed things online, as far as I'm aware, having a huge influence on people. But I think when you look at the Christian dynamic, and look at what Christianity is, and it's this God dying on the cross, suffering, and this message: you are supposed to suffer. You are supposed to feel guilty. The more you feel guilty, the more you suffer, the better, But then at the same time, obviously, we're breaking out of this narrative. So people are like, okay, I want to have sex with 500 people. I want to get a vibrator that's this big and like a pneumatic drill, or I want to masturbate to, porn of like 50 people getting raped or something like that, and it's almost like this extreme so far, but what pornography is doing is essentially feeding the dynamic of guilt and shame, because these people go off in a quiet way, they don't create like a nice space to make love to themselves, which is what I say to my clients. I say, make love to yourself, make the room beautiful, put incense on, put candles on, put some nice ambient music, some mantras and so on, and gently just connect with your heart, and then make love with yourself the same way a romantic couple would make love. So you have this kind of ongoing dynamic. And what I notice, for example, you talk about conventional sex therapists, and a lot of what I'm hearing coming from conventional sex therapists, I just feel like it's still missing the whole soul, of sex. So for example, I heard something recently where a sex therapist had had recommended to this young couple that were 16, they were having sex. They had to have sex in a sneaky way so that the parents wouldn't know about it. They were going in very quick. And the man was getting soreness. He was 16, I think he was getting soreness on his penis. So her solution is use more lube. Hang on a minute. If the girl isn't warmed up enough to be wet, you know, what's going on inside her? You know, do you really want to be encouraging the first sexual experiences to be, do you know what I mean? This rush in a little cupboard or whatever, absent of love, you know? And I know that, you know, for example, in America, there's this big thing of teaching abstinence. And I'm not saying teach not to have sex, but I'm saying approach it in a sacred way and perhaps change your focus about it. And also understand that perhaps just gazing into the eyes of your beloved is just as beautiful as putting your penis inside her, you know, and that jerking backwards and forward to elicit an ejaculation, if that's what sex is about, it's always going to be unfulfilling, because it's almost like you're missing the whole journey just to get to this end. And the end is what? Just lying there feeling exhausted, you know?
Yeah, you were talking about having a terrible sex education when you grew up. Do you think sex education has improved since then? And if you were to be part of designing the curriculum of sex education for UK or India, what do you suggest?
Funny you're asking, because it is my dream to be in charge of designing the sex education curriculum for school kids, right?
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. So I'm starting at the moment, obviously it's very, very easy to teach adults. So I'm creating sex education courses for adults that are actual courses someone can just buy. They get all the videos, all the coaching and so on, you know, teaching them about themselves, about their partner and so on. Okay. I'm hoping in the very, very near future to expand this out into universities in the UK as well. Yeah. And to actually get it onto the university's agenda. And it's a big issue coming up in universities because you have date rape and so on. And I mean, so for example, when I was growing up, the sex education was kind of like you could get AIDS and you can get pregnant. That was basically what they told us, you know. And there's been some improvement, but what I think is the big problem is obviously there's this issue of consent, right? Now, the minute I start talking to anyone about consent, they're going to cringe because it's just become really traumatic for people because people don't understand what consent means. I mean, even recently I was talking with some male friends about this, and one of them said, yeah, but if she doesn't have like a black eye, how can it have been rape, for example, you know? And the problem, and even though in England, we are actually one of the most atheistic countries in the world, we still do have like a certain minority of parents who complain about the sex education and attempt to sort of pull their children out of sex education class. And I think that also the government's making the mistake of trying to focus too much on sort of LGBT, which is obviously a minority. And I'm not saying to ignore this minority. I'm not saying to not educate people to be aware about different kinds of couples of two females, two males together and so on. But I think that, you know, when we look at the majority of people, there's this kind of heterosexual dynamic of these men who are oversexed, probably quite possibly watching porn from 10 years, 11 years, 12 years, watching hardcore stuff, violent stuff that they're not being told, look, if you do this to a real girl, you will go to jail for it. You know, at the same time, you've got these girls that are probably not watching porn, not getting so much education. At the same time, girls are still being told. I mean, for example, I was never told as a child, as a girl, that it was okay to tell someone, no, don't touch me. You know, if Uncle so-and-so came around and he wanted to hug me and hold me on his lap and I didn't want it, I had to do that. And that's what all girls are getting told, you know, and there's a general dynamic that if a woman says no about something, she'll be really questioned. Does she have a right to say no? What about that guy's feelings? You know, I mean, I've seen this happening in Tantra groups on Facebook that one girl has said, do not private message me. And she's been attacked by numerous men coming up with the most bizarre comments. And it's just, so as women, we are not being taught, you have a right to say no. You have a right to say, look, I'm okay with this. I'm not okay with that. Men also, men to understand, we all need to understand, that we can say when it comes to anything to do with our body, touching our bodies, we can say no. We can say, hang on a minute. We're even in the middle of sex, but I've had enough. I don't want it anymore. I want it to stop. I'm not feeling good about this, and this stuff isn't being talked about. But then to go into it even more deeply, when it comes down to what the actual problem is, the problem is people do not understand pleasure. When you look at pornography, what do you think pleasure is? Oh, it's a cock this big going into bam, 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 as hard as he can, and ejaculation squirting everywhere, Whereas in real life, what is pleasure? To me, pleasure is connecting with someone. It's seeing them smiling. It's feeling the energy between us. It can just be a gentle touch down my arm. And maybe in that moment, I want to be hugged. I want to be kissed, but I don't want any more. And for that person to understand that, because when we, whether as females, whether as males, become entitled, feel we have a sense of entitlement to another person, to pleasure ourselves on another person, this is what most people are doing. We're going to shut that person down to their pleasure. So for example, I speak to so many men that will tell me, I love my wife so much, but she hasn't had sex with me for 10 years. They didn't know any better. Nobody knew any better. Nobody had any education, but they went in and they didn't understand about sex. The woman didn't understand how to say, no, I like this, I don't like that, and so on. The man was scared to ask, because if he asked, he would look like he wasn't a man, So I think ultimately the solution to all these problems, and I think sexual harassment, rape, sexual abuse, bad relations between male and females in general, misogyny, misandry, and so on, it's actually got to come down to falling back into a relationship of real respect and real love and understanding for ourselves and for the other person, and really understanding just about how beautiful sometimes just sitting and breathing with your beloved can be.
From whatever study available in the societies, particularly in the American communities also, particularly sex surveys by very popular publications, what we know for sure is that the girls don't ask for any specific thing. While, as you said, the entire porn industry is geared towards male gaze and male desire, and it is completely about they seeking pleasure and not the women seeking pleasure. So
they masturbate inside the woman, basically.
So why do you think there is this huge gap in literature also, even in sex surveys done by now all the popular publications, if you see, they keep talking about sexology, they have several experts talking about answering questions, but this has not changed so much about the female pleasure, so much about female sexuality. This has not changed the understanding about female sexuality. What do you think is the challenge? The challenge is the political structure, or the social structure, or the morality, the standard of morality? What do you think is the challenge?
Well, we live in a society, and if we look at the Western European society, which has obviously infected the whole world, we live in a society that is geared towards males, their pleasure, their penis, and their ejaculation. And this has been the story going on essentially for thousands of years, at least for 3,000 years, I would say. So though it is a man's world, and female pleasure, female anything, take second priority. So when you hear statistics like apparently 80% of women do not orgasm from intercourse with a male. With lesbians, it's much, much higher, but they say 80% of females do not orgasm from intercourse with a male. Many of those don't orgasm at all. And you just think, well, how can this be? Because women naturally, we are multi-orgasmic, we have so many pleasure zones. But, when I was growing up, like I mentioned about the sex education, and what I kind of understood about myself for the first few years I was sexually activated was, I have a hole down there, and that hole is for him to put his penis in and jerk his penis backwards and forward and ejaculate. That was my understanding. And it was only when I started learning about jade egg, yoni egg, about tantric massage, about Taoist massage, that I started to actually realize, that there's a lot more going on down there, and realizing I have a G spot, I have a cervix, there's also an A spot, a K spot, a U spot, and that not only are these like amazing pleasure zones, but these are also actually keys to like unlocking like blocked negative emotions and traumas out of our whole body, which is just like so incredible. But I think there's this thing that we talk about in Tantra called disassociating. So disassociating, it might be, imagine you start talking to me about football or cricket and I'm not interested, and I just, and I disassociate because I don't want to listen. Okay. Now, because of the way that females are brought up, right? Females learn to disassociate. So that's why you have these, we're taught, be a good girl, behave yourself. No, a girl's not going to get angry. You're not going to argue back. Women are afraid if they even are opinionated, if they show intelligence, this might make a man not want to marry them, for example. So women tend to kind of disassociate. And when it comes to having sex, obviously, there's a lot of guilt and shame, confusion, negative emotions. And a lot of women, arguably the majority of women, will basically disassociate, open their legs, and let their husband do what he wants to do. I mean, we used to say in England, we used to go, lie back and think of queen and country. That's what women were told when they got married. They were told sex is horrible, it's a terrible experience, but it's your wifely duty to do that for your husband. So you're going to disassociate, lie back, think of queen and country, and let him do what he wants. And when this has been practiced over hundreds of years, it almost gets programmed into our DNA. So we're kind of inheriting this sort of sexual approach, from our parents, from our ancestors. There's no doubt been a lot of rape going on of and abuse of our ancestors as well. And as women, we're kind of holding this legacy inside of our bodies. Now, obviously, this is a time when the whole tables are turning. We can see countries now are being governed by women. Women are now, in the past, when I was growing up, we had Margaret Thatcher, who to me was a role model, not because I like her politics, but as a female standing up and holding her ground, but she had to act 100 times more like a male, even to just be respected at all. Whereas now this is changing, and women are able to wear bright red lipstick and heels and be sexy and still be treated as intelligent, still be treated as a worthy, a companion, in politics, in business, and so on. And this is only going to increase. And as, many people like myself are becoming aware, I have my own daughter, I tell my daughter, if you want that, you insist on it. I don't care if you're wrong, you insist on it. And that is what I want to see you doing. If you don't want it, you say no, I'm going to back you up. And that's what we need to be telling our daughters, because a world where women are more empowered, it's also going to be a world where men are more empowered. There's never not any matriarchal society known to anthropologists where women have ever oppressed males. But I'm not even talking about a matriarchal society. I'm talking about a society where males and females are equal, where women are allowed to be feminine, where males are allowed to be masculine, where males are also sometimes allowed to be feminine. We're sometimes allowed to be masculine too, but we can be what is authentic to us. And we don't need to be scared that if I show my true self, everyone's going to hate me.
Yeah, this is amazing what you know. I was intrigued by the kind of videos you make. Particularly, pandemics are a time throughout human history when there are new thought processes, new thought leaders, probably you are also emerging as, having come from King's College in London, have this academic bent of mind, have a plan to go into universities and, change a system of educating adults. This could be a new pathway. Maybe it is, it might be a breakthrough in sex education in the years to come. I wish you all the very best. You want to add some last points, going forward, 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, you think the pandemic might change the way people look at things? No, it's changing a lot of things already, in terms of nurturing relationships, in terms of, appreciating your spouse. It's changing a lot of things across the planet. Do you think 10 years down the line you will see a completely changed, a society? As you said, New Zealand has Finland, Taiwan, and other societies are now accepting women leaders, female leaders. Now, do you see a lot of change coming in the coming years?
I mean, society is changing. There are huge changes. When I look at how things were when I was in my teenage years, and I look at the way things are changed now, and even though I think that there is a lot that needs to change, I'm so happy. My daughter is growing up. She's about to turn 10, and she has no feeling that she's inferior to a male, which I most certainly did at that time when I was that age, So I just think things are changing because they have to, and when we look at, for example, the oppression of the females, the oppression of sexuality, the way that the earth is being polluted, the way that the countries of the world were colonized by Europe, this is all coming from the same kind of, it's like a lack of a real spiritual connection that makes us need to do this, and when we actually start to realize, we need to respect the earth, we need to respect each other, we need to respect ourselves. And sexuality is just a huge, huge part of it, because sexuality is Shakti energy, it's life force, it permeates through everything. And it's changing very fast, and it's only going to continue to change. And the reason it's going to continue to change is that now that people are getting a taste of what's going on and what we can have, people are like, I don't want that old system. I don't want to watch my porn movies anymore. Now that I realize I can have love, now that I realize I can actually talk to a woman and experience connection, and that actually gives me way more than my porn movies ever gave me, so it's inevitable. I think it's just the fate of humanity. If we don't change, the world is finished, basically, and the oppression of sexuality, the oppression of ourselves, the oppression of the female, it just cannot continue,
Yeah, one last question here, because you are very optimistic about the future. Now, it is inevitable that change is coming. Now, there is a new narrative. For example, I can recall the author Angela Sainis. She's a journalist, who speaks about how science, the whole of Western science, has been shaped in favor of males. Even from discovery, even women were blocked out, who were eligible for a Nobel Prize in science. They were blocked out, and somebody, who was a junior to a female was chosen for that award. There were a lot of stories now coming up, a lot of discourses, new narratives about what really happened behind the scenes. Those stories are now coming out. You think, as you said, your next generation, that is your daughter's generation, will create a new world in which, we will be more equal than before. That is, I'm talking about men and women will be more equal than before.
Yeah, I just think it is changing, and it's funny. Yes, the world was created by men and for men for a very, very long time. I mean, even AI and facial recognition, it's designed to recognize a white male face, not a female face, not a black face, not an Indian face, but people are talking about this. And now, for example, the new AI that came out in America, and people start going, look, this is just confusing a normal Black person for a Black criminal because it can't tell Black people apart, for example, you know. So people are now speaking out about it, and people are being heard. And yeah, I mean, I think there's a big mess. I think that there's a lot of confusion, but you've just got such a tipping point of people, you know, who are just saying this has got to end. You know, you look at the huge power that places like India, China, Africa are capable of wielding, you know. And, you know, just the same way that, for example, like the economies of third world countries, it's also been kept down, the female's been kept down, but it's not going to last, you know. And if you look at history, everything, look, the Roman Empire was massive. It was all over Europe. Within 1 year, most of Europe had gone back to tribal rule, just like that, 1 year, you know.
Yeah.
And when we look at, for example, what's happening with America, what Biden has just done with the dollar, I mean, where is that going to end? We look at America and it's the superpower that could be gone in a year. We don't know, you know, we don't know what's going to happen. But I do think that there's just an awakening of consciousness going on, you know. And even the people talk about, obviously, as humanity, we are going through a dark time, but dark times are times of rebirth, you know. So things just are changing, and this is just life. This is destiny, I think, you know.
Yeah, I can go on talking about it, because you're one of the persons talking about the role of breath in our sexual energy. You know, we can go on talking about such things in detail, but because the time is almost up from the plan I had. So let's connect sometime again. This is an amazing conversation. Thank you for your time. Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much for this amazing insights into the
my pleasure.
Female,
I really enjoyed
sexual.
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so very much. Take care. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.